This police department works very, very hard to keep this community safe. And I think it's been pretty clear from the statistics we've generated over the last 2.5 years that the work of the men and women of this department is bearing fruit. Violent crime is down by nearly 1/3 in this city over that period of time. Stolen cars are almost down by 50%. Overall crime in this city is down by nearly 20%. And the people who live in the neighborhoods know that, and the data verifies that perception. Now, one of the things we've done in order to make sure that the officers on the street are pursuing the mission we have charged them with and implementing the strategies we've directed them to is to use the computer automated dispatch system to account for all of their activity. Some of the most significant activity they engage in are car stops and field interviews. We match up the car stops and the field interviews with our crime map, and we make sure that the overlay between car stops and field interviews and predatory street crime are very closely matched. It's a very active police department. Now, in doing that, if one were to look at the grand total of computer-aided dispatch data, you would, if my officers are doing what I want them to do, see significant increases in the total CAD number. That's a different number, but includes the number of times citizens call the police asking for police assistance. All right, the number that indicates who wants help is buried in the big number of all the computer-aided dispatch we do. Every car stop, every field interview, every lunch break, every I got to go to the department and write a report, everything the officer does is now documented in our CAD system. So accordingly, when we complied with the open records requests in an interest of being transparent and responsive, we dumped a mountain of data in the requester's lap. Much of that data, the big 6-figure numbers, was the CAD data that includes everything the department does. Buried in that data were the number of citizen calls for service. Now we're going to share with you, so you don't have to write all this stuff down. We'll email you the PowerPoint charts that indicate this, so you've got some sense of perspective. It defines what calls for service are, and then it shows in 2005 through 2009 the calls for service and the total CAD data. And it breaks out the administrative data from the citizen-generated data. So, for example, in 2009, there were indeed 817,725 transactions on our CAD system. Of that number, 563,681 were administrative, generated by the police department to the police department about police stuff, including car stops. 254,044 were, somebody please send me the police. We have a problem. We sent the cops in 2009 to 254,044 calls. 2008, we sent them to 266,577 calls. The amount of, officer-generated activity has increased, according to our calculations, by 277% in 2.5 years. The number of car stops have increased 277%. That's a lot of activity, and that's a big piece of this. In addition to this, as I say, we've been very directive with our officers. I want as little uncommitted time as possible, and that means I need to know where you are and what you're doing, and that means you have to call off on the radio. And every one of those calls is in the big 800,000 number. Now, the reason I'm going into this level of minutia about bureaucratic stuff is, quite frankly, that, the reality of crime and the perception of crime are very important issues in this city, and I don't want to have inadvertently provided data that undermines people's confidence in what's going on out there. The calls for service tracks very well with the crime data, but the big admin number grows every year as our officers continue to account for their activities and become busier. Busier meaning generating more activity on their own.